Okay, good morning, everybody. We will get started with introductions. Welcome again to the Lumsden McCormick Annual Exempt Organizations Conference. My name is Christine Prue, and I will serve as your host for the webinar today. And I'm also joined by Jill Johnson, who will assist to monitor the webinar and help with our questions here today. Now, before we get into our introductions, I am going through several housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, and once available, it will be posted to the Lumsden McCormick website. Additionally, there will be a slide deck available on the website for all presentations that we are permitted to share. Both the chat and Q&A feature are enabled. Please make sure to add your questions to the Q&A box. We will be answering questions throughout the presentation as they come in, so ask them as they come to your mind. We are offering 1 hour of CPE credit for each webinar. Therefore, all polling questions must be answered. There will be 4 polling questions throughout the presentation, and CPE certificates will be emailed from support@prolera.com within 30 days. The subject line will read Lumsden McCormick CPE certificate. At the end of the webinar, please complete the webinar survey, which will automatically launch. The survey will serve as your webinar evaluation, and that is required for CPE credit. Additionally, when you receive your certificate from Prolera, you will also receive a webinar evaluation. This evaluation is optional to complete. However, we appreciate any and all feedback you may have. Any other questions related to housekeeping items, please leave them in the chat for us. Now I'm going to turn over the program to Jill Johnson, audit partner with Lumsden McCormick. Jill specializes in services to exempt organizations, including healthcare and health and human services. Among Jill's credentials, she is a certified fraud examiner and is certified by the AICPA as a certified information technology professional, which will tie directly into the topic at hand. Jill, I will hand things over to you.
Great. Good morning, everyone. We're happy today to welcome Candace Vogel, Chief, Special Investigations and Prosecutions Bureau of the Erie County District Attorney's Office. Candace Vogel has served as a prosecutor in the Erie County District Attorney's Office since 1986. She was the first woman to be appointed as the chief of the office's Special Investigation and Prosecutions Bureau, where she has been assigned to investigate and prosecute cases involving financial crimes for more than 30 years. Chief Vogel is responsible for overseeing a team of assistant district attorneys assigned to cases involving embezzlement, fraud, identity theft, tax evasion, official misconduct, and the financial exploitation of elderly victims. Chief Vogel handles criminal cases that involve more time-intensive investigations and requires technical skills and training not possessed by most prosecutors. After obtaining her Bachelor of Arts and Master of Education degrees from the State University of New York at Albany, Chief Vogel received her Juris Doctor from the State University of New York at Buffalo Law School. She is admitted to practice in New York State and federal district courts, as well as the Supreme Court of the United States. She also received specialized training in digital evidence at the National Computer Forensics Institute in Hoover, Alabama. Please join me in welcoming Candace Vogel.
Would you like me to continue at this point?
Absolutely. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. This is a busy season for all of us, but it's particularly busy for those of us who handle white-collar crime as prosecutors. It's that time of the year when people generally start to gather materials for tax preparation or just to look at how the year end has appeared. And often something seems amiss. You find out that you are potentially a victim of a crime. Scam artists or financial exploiters come in assorted sizes, shapes, and colors. This is not a robbery. This is somebody who comes into your business and into your life through your heart and through your brain. White-collar crime is something a little bit different than all other crimes. I could go on and give you all sorts of statistics, but the question is, do numbers really matter? No, they don't, unless you're one of the numbers. Different cases and different types of cases come into the district attorney's office in many different ways. Nonprofit or public organizations being a victim of a crime, you will find out are really no different for the most part than public organizations and individuals. For that reason, I would ask you now to answer a polling question. This is, how do cases get to the district attorney's office? On Law and Order, we're always the last half hour. But in reality, how do they get into the district attorney's office? Please look at these questions. The police have put a target in handcuffs. The defendant is mentioned in the newspaper. The defendant has put money in an offshore account, or none of the above.
Thank you, Candace. And everyone, while you answer this question, please note that it is a two-part question. Candace's question is part one, and part two is also asking if you are attending this webinar to earn CPE credits. So especially if you are here to earn CPE credit, make sure to answer that second part of the question. I will give it just a moment as I see some more votes are coming in right now. Okay, I'm going to close this poll in just a second. There's a few of you who haven't answered, so now is your chance. Okay, we're going to close polling and share the results.
Okay, I can see that most of you have answered none of the above. So let's go on to a conversation about how do they get to the district attorney's office. For some reason, it doesn't progress. There we go. Oftentimes on television, or I think it's generally believed that a person is arrested at the scene. In white collar crime, this generally doesn't happen. White collar crime normally is something that has to be studied before there's enough probable cause for us to make an arrest. And oftentimes that arrest is not a matter of a person being taken out of their office in handcuffs. One of the other ways in which we get cases is that the victim calls the police so that we can start developing the case. Police are usually your first choice, and then the police will get in touch with the district attorney's office because oftentimes they need subpoenas or possibly even a search warrant, or because it's not a common crime, also they will work closely with our office in guidance on what type of questions and where to look for information. I am amazed at how many times I get a call from an attorney who has had a situation brought to their attention by the district, brought to their attention, and contacts the district attorney's office or law enforcement to get the process going. Or the victim may call the district attorney's office directly. And when I say victim, even if you have a suspicion, don't be afraid to call and discuss the matter with someone up in SIP if it's a financial crime. There are tips on public integrity unit that there is a website for public integrity, and oftentimes we will get our first glimpse of what might be going on at a public organization through something that is left on the public integrity tip line. The Office of New York State Inspector General also brings us several cases that they have done the investigation on, and our job is the prosecution. District Attorney's Office, for the most part, is usually just handling the prosecution of cases, but in white collar crime, it becomes far more common that we are heavily involved in the investigation as well, hence the name Special Investigations and Prosecutions Unit. Whistleblower. I'm sure that many organizations have been surprised when a call has been received from us saying we are interested in, or you find that your organization is being investigated. it's because somebody has brought some information to our attention. So what are the crimes that we deal with? There are all sorts of different crimes, but they generally end up falling into the following categories. Larceny, which translates as stealing. One of the primary slogans in the SIP investigations is that it is not a crime unless there was no permission and authority. Those two words are so important. Permission and authority is an element, lack of, that we must prove in our investigations. So what is embezzlement? Embezzlement, obviously, is a theft of money, generally money. It might also be some other type of item. But embezzlement includes taking money that you were allowed to enter the account, okay? You have permission and authority to write checks. You have permission and authority to use a credit card, but you used that account or those checks without permission and authority for the purpose for which you used it. Generally, the crook used it for themselves. False pretenses, a larceny by showing false pretenses, such as I open up, the company's name is Company XYZ. I open an account in the name of Company XYZ ? And now I can deposit checks, or I have been depositing checks made out to Company XYZ. It's false pretenses that it appears I had permission and authority to cash those checks. Perhaps the best example of permission and authority is forgery. Forgery is not necessarily what we all think it is. There is the lack of permission and authority. I often use the example that when I first came to SIP 36 years ago, I had a son who was in college, and I had to deposit some checks that had arrived at the house into his account. And I walked over to the bank very nicely, signed his name on the back of the checks and deposited them. Walked out into the hall with some of my new colleagues and said, I can't believe I've been in SIP for 2 hours and I just forged a check. And it was pointed out to me, no, you didn't forge a check. You had permission and authority. So we have to be very careful as to what permission has been given. You know, these screens that come up on your computer all the time as to how you can access information in your office on your computer. That's giving some permission and authority and taking away some permissions and authority. Particularly during COVID, we had all sorts of permission being allowed that never had been there before, such as allowing to work from home and getting into files or doing tasks. That permission to handle that work had not been given before. So it's important to always remember, be careful what permissions and authorities you are giving, because it can turn what you believe is a crime into possibly a civil action, but certainly not something that we're going to be able to prosecute. Falsification of business records. Who's handling the bank records? Who's handling the information over the computer? So many of the computer programs, nobody's really looking at them. You log in a check, it's made payable. You have an invoice to company ABC. The check is apparently logged in as being to company ABC for $10,000. $10,000 is taken out of the account by whoever cashed that check. But you find out, if you look at the underlying documents, that ABC is not who that check was made out to. That check was made out to your bookkeeper who cashed it, but your bank record, your internal document says it's made out to company ABC. And unless you compare the two, the books are still going to balance. So you have to go and look at the underlying documentation. Identity theft. That's using personal identifying information of another person. Of course, you know, when back in the day, the only personal identification that you had was your name, your address, your telephone number. But think about it. Now it includes passwords. It includes checking account numbers, all sorts of items that identify you. Somebody else sitting down at your computer using your identifying information may be a crime, especially if it was done to commit another crime. Insurance fraud, we handle official misconduct when it involves a public servant, and possession of stolen property. So how does it happen? How do you become a victim of a financial crime? Well, there appears to be two different methods in which this happens. Internally, we have thefts and fraud, which are generally the items that I've just mentioned. But externally, your organization is exposed to scams and frauds on a daily basis. Same way that you personally are possibly going to be a victim of scams and frauds. The crimes remain the same. The crime is still forgery, larceny, identity theft. But what changes now is the technology by which these crimes are committed. So let's talk a little bit about external scams. Remember, a scam artist comes in through your heart and through your brain. Hacking, getting into your personal information at your organization, such as PII, which is personal identifying information. That may be just a list that has been left behind on a desk. I've had cases, you look back at these things and you say, how did this happen? And it happens in bizarre ways. We had a situation years ago when personal identifying information came out of a hospital, and we were trying desperately to try to find out how this information got out. And we found out it was as simple as some patient family wanted to order a pizza, and they were allowed to go to a desk. They sat down at the desk to order the pizza and managed to make off with a list that had all of the nurses' names, address, telephone numbers, and social security numbers, because they were going to be handling a class. So hacking can take place in many different ways. It does not mean it's an internal person who has taken information. Hacking into computers, I'm sure you've had training in that type of crime, but it can happen so simply. Checks that are altered, forged, and cashed by unknown persons. And I wouldn't be surprised if our audience has, many of you have all of a sudden found checks that were altered or forged and cashed someplace other than Buffalo, New York. And you're trying to figure out, how did that happen? Okay, it's an external scam, which I will go on to explain. Requests for payments to be sent to a false wire transfer address. We're all trying to find the fastest way and easiest way to take care of things. You get a letter that says, I've just changed my bank account. Please transfer the information, the monies this week to our new account, and there is a new address for you. And how simple. You cut and paste it. You don't type it in. And I will talk about how these addresses can be a little bit, if you look at them good, they're Looney Tunes, and you should have picked up on it. A request for funds already deposited. I've just sent a check to your organization or to a business, and I've said, here's $10,000 for services XYZ, or this is our contribution for this year. It's for $10,000. Thank you so very much. And now you get a call within 3 days. Sorry, this check was an error. It should not be for $10,000. It should have only been for $1,000. Please return the additional $9,000, which you do. Only to find out that that was a forged check. And you have now taken $9,000 out of your account of good money and sent it on to an address that's going to be a phony address, or one that we have probably unlikely to trace down. So these are kind of normal happenings. What I'm finding now is more and more calls to the office in the threat of revealing personal information, known as sextortion. The request is send Bitcoin or send by gift card a certain amount of money, or we will reveal information that we have been following you on your computer and we have pictures. Okay, I mean, maybe there are pictures out there, but this is a scam. This is a way to get money from you. And oftentimes there's nothing out there. It's just the fear that something is going to be revealed. And now, do you send money to protect the reputation of an individual or of a corporation, an organization, and such?
Candace,
Yes.
I do have one question that came through. It says, I frequently get phishing requests to change the direct deposit of an employee to a scam bank account. What's the best way to handle these? They reported it to the bank, reported it to the government online, and simply deleted. Is it even worthwhile to report those? Because it doesn't seem like the scammers ever get caught.
Well, yes, report it, okay? In particular, if it, I always keep the target, the criminal complaint center. These records then can be kept, and maybe we won't be able to check one particular situation, but if the information that is given to the National Crime Center can be amalgamated and we find out that it's all coming from the same source or sources, there's a much better chance of being able to find out where it's coming from. You know, the anonymity of computers is overwhelming now, but yes, do report it. Strange clues can be developed by putting information together from different sources. And although your company or your organization may have it happening on a regular basis, another organization may have it happening as well. And you can find the tie-in, what is the common source. And don't just let it go. I mean, yes, the steps you're taking is absolutely correct, but don't be afraid to report it because it could be of help down the road. I've always, it's amazing how, what happens to trigger the answer to some of these. And just in cases of, and we'll talk about people who cash checks, the information, bits and little pieces can often lead us back to the actual source. The solvability of these cases is tough, and I admit it's low, but it's getting better, and we're getting better at it, but we can't get better at it if we don't know the crimes occurred. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so how do we avoid this? Well, one is read your email carefully. In particular, the text, the typing. You will find mistakes. I can't tell you how many times I have had information sent to me and it says Candace Vogel instead of Candace Vogel. But it's that kind of spelling that internally you might see a message that says to the treasurer, please send $1,000 to XYZ. And if you looked at that email carefully, you would see it said it came from Candace Vogel instead of Candace Vogel. And you say, aha, this isn't really true. Okay. So read those emails carefully for spelling errors, for something in the language that might be a little bit off. Oftentimes you'll find that a British expression would be used that we don't use here in America. So be careful as you're reading these. Do not open email from unknown sources. I can't say that enough. It's oftentimes they're phishing expeditions, but don't open email from unknown sources. And look at the headers carefully. Check for spelling errors. And be careful what you put into your computer, such as thumb drives. One of my all-time favorite trainings to do was, matter of fact, I still have it. At some point, I put 2 thumb drives around the office. One is labeled Sports Illustrated Preview. This never got returned to me until the meeting at the end of the day. The other thumb drive said bank records on it. It must have been returned to me at least 5 times before our meeting. And at the meeting, I discussed the idea that anybody who had the Sports Illustrated thumb drive and had put it into their computer, this could have been malware, but don't worry about it because the only person who knows who put it into their computer was me. That wasn't true, but it immediately was given back to me, and a number of people came over to tell me they were so sorry they had done it. So be careful what you put into your computer. Think about it. A free thumb drive arrives at your home or at your point of business as an advertisement. That thumb drive can have malware on it. So be careful what you put into your computer. So here comes another polling question. How many of your employees have use of the company credit card? 1, only officers and management, or not sure?
Okay, we'll give everyone a few moments to answer this polling question. And Candace, just for your reference, we have about 20 minutes left of our presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone, I see we have almost 100% participation, so I'll give it just a few more seconds. Those last few people can get their votes in, and we will share the results. Okay. And here are those results.
Okay, interesting to see that 39% aren't sure, and that is awfully important. So let's now go on to some other issues involved today. Why are my checks being forged? We are seeing many cases of people calling our office that I have a check that was cashed in Syracuse. We never made out this check. We don't even know who cashed the check. It was supposed to go to our vendor. And the question becomes then, who had access to your checks? The answer, strangely enough, is also maybe not an internal investigation. It may be an external source. So how did the checks get deposited from a different payee's names in New York City, Syracuse, or North Carolina? Was it stolen from the mail? An employee took a picture of it and sold it? Or someone else has access to it, or all of the above?
Okay, those votes are still coming in, so I'll give it another 10 seconds so everybody can get their votes in. Okay, it looks like everybody's answered. So here are our results.
You're right. All of the above. Most of you had that answer absolutely correct. So let's talk a little bit now about that. And we're going to talk about the wire transfer, because these can both be done as external and internal crimes. The external crime, or the check crime, why I say it's internal or external. The best way to get money out of any business or any individual is to get a check from them. Okay, that's still, certainly there's Zelle and Venmo and such, but checks are still the norm where commercial money changes hands. So if I can get someone to give me a picture of a check, just take that picture when it came in, I can then use software to make it appear to be an entirely different check. All I have to have is your account number and your routing number and make a completely different check. But I'm not dumb. I'm not going to be going in and depositing that check. I'll get it from one of your employees who maybe got a check for $10 and I'm now making it out to be a check $10,000. I can get it from someplace. I can actually get it out of a mailbox now. I hope you're all aware of the fact that be careful what mailboxes you're depositing your money and your checks into. It could be somebody who walked by a desk and took a check out. But as long as I have a check that I can now alter, I can deposit it or have somebody, what we call mules, who has some identification, who will go in and deposit the check into a phony account. I deposit the check into the phony account, and now I hire somebody, or I have a mule who goes in and takes money out of that account, having sold me that account number by just giving me their card to their account with their password on it. And now I have two people, the one who's on the camera depositing the check, maybe at an ATM machine, and I have the individual who's taking the money out at an ATM machine. That's not the money person who got the most money. Plus, I can have used a phony account and such. So don't blame yourselves for checks that are now appearing to be forged. The best system is to make sure you catch it quickly by looking at the checks and notifying law enforcement quickly, and also by being careful where you put your mail. I talked a little bit also about watching how things are typed, doing wire transfers. Again, this can be an internal or an external. But if you look carefully at this slide, you'll see that the word Smith on the answer is not Smith at all. It's SRNITH. And if you've just cut and pasted, you're going to have sent it to a different account when you think you're paying Charles Smith. So now let's talk about internal criminal activity. Public and private organizations, as I stated, face the same issues. Who is minding the store? So who is the thief? It could be anyone. Generally, we find it's the most trusted employee, someone who comes in early, leaves late, and never takes a vacation. The person who has volunteered to take care of the book and probably has done it for years. A person who knows everything and how it works and solves every issue, apparently. The person who handles fundraisers. Not that these aren't wonderful people for the most part, but our thieves tend to be these people who volunteer and help themselves to cash. Oftentimes, people are unaware of how much cash passes through businesses and public entities. So what are the red flags? Well, the red flags normally are that a balance is in the negative. I mean, we have actually had organizations come to us and say, we just found out our checks are bouncing. We had no idea. I had no idea that our line of credit was gone, or that the line of credit is far less than one would expect. Credit card balances are off, or we don't even know whose credit card this is or what account this is. Payment of utilities more than once a month. No cash is deposited. A deposit, normally, if you're bringing in cash, we'll have cash and it will have checks and credit cards that went through your merchant account. But no cash ever, there's something wrong. We call them cashectomy here at SIP, but just taking the cash, and there's no trail generally. People don't steal cash and then go and deposit it in their bank account for normally. Late deposits. A deposit that should have been made on Friday doesn't appear until Tuesday. Well, where was that money? Is it hard to believe that somebody went gambling and they're now behind? They're always sure that they're going to be able to pay it back. So that deposit is late because they're assuming they're going to be able to put the money back in. A client's account is wacky. What do I mean by that? Well, somebody pays a fee for a full year and you find out that the account was voided and was only for 6 months, according to your documents, but the client is unaware that they ever canceled it. And that money now has been taken. The employee insists on controlling everything and takes no time off. And when somebody does get suspicious, there are usually complicated excuses or failures to make meetings. So how do we identify these individuals? There's a psychology of deceit. The question is, why do bright and talented people turn to the dark side? Greed, gambling, feel unappreciated. I mean, I'm not paid enough. I should be making as much as the guy next to me or whatever. Drugs or alcohol, and need. And I can tell you in 36 years, I have prosecuted one case that the person took the money because of real need of medical expenses. So how do they get started? Well, I call it salami embezzlements. For the most part, employees do not start out wanting to steal money. The same is true in civil cases as well, or private organizations, or even in everyday living. All of a sudden, it's like this time of year, you pass the stores and they're selling the yard of beef. And you go in and you buy the yard of beef because you're going to have it around for the holidays. And you get home and you slice off a little bit at a time, just a little bit at a time. By the time your company arrives sometime in mid-December, you go to the refrigerator to get out the yard of beef and there's a piece left about this big. So that's how it starts. Maybe it's a check that I don't get paid until Friday. So I'm going to take $50 out of the petty cash and I will put it back on Friday when I get paid. And you do. You put the $50 back. The next time it happens, it's a little bit easier, but you decide you'll take $100 and you pay it back. The third time you take $100, but you only have $70 to put back in. So you write it down, $30, but it keeps increasing. And pretty soon you stop keeping track of how much you're behind. Nobody's noticed. What difference does it make? So that's the salami embezzlement. It starts small until it really revs up, and then maybe it'll get noticed. So let's do one more polling question. Most employees start stealing immediately, true or false?
Great, those answers are coming in quick for this one. While we wait for everybody to answer though, Candace, we have about 10 minutes left. Okay, I'm gonna give everyone about 4 more seconds. Looks like those votes have come in. And here are our results.
That's correct. Most employees do not start immediately. But that small number that do, chances are they've been passed on from another employee, another employer who thought something was suspicious, and they'll start right in again as soon as they hit the right spot. All they have to do is learn your method. And then once they know your methods, they know where they can work their way in. So the biggest problem is the reason they get away with it is that there are internal control weaknesses. I understand it is difficult to find employees. It is costly to find employees, and it's easier to have one person doing multiple jobs. But it doesn't pay if eventually you find out tens of thousands of dollars are gone out of your business. So be careful. Don't have one person having the final say on all the bookkeeping and all the financial obligations. That's easy for me to say, and it's easy for it to happen. Make sure that whoever writes the checks isn't the person who does the balancing of the bank statements. If I am writing checks for different amounts to different people that are showing up in your check register, well, if the same person is controlling both ends of it, no one's going to know what's happening. People who call in the payroll are the same person who write out the check payments. I can't tell you how many cases we've had that people are getting checks through the payroll system. The amount of employment has been called in each week by the same clerk, but it's the same clerk who also is writing herself another check for payroll. Maybe if you think about it, one of the things that we look at in these cases, did the person ever even pay taxes on those extra checks that they're getting? Was there another crime here as well, not only stealing from the company, but also a tax fraud? Make deposits and reviews the same monthly statements. I don't know how many times I've said, did anyone compare what was in the check register to the bank statement that came back to the actual check? As I mentioned earlier, was the check apparently made out to company ABC, but if you looked at the check that is on your statement, the actual hard copy, the copy of the hard copy check, you're going to find out it was made to your employee. But it appeared that a expense was actually being paid. Use of the credit card and review of the statements. As we indicated, I'm amazed at how many people don't know who has use of their credit cards, okay? There may be 5 different credit cards out there that were issued initially, and no one has any idea who's using them. The person who is writing out the check for the use of that credit card may not even have the knowledge to know who has permission and authority to use that credit card. One of the stories that I say, you don't know it until you see something weird. We had one organization that had large use of the credit card. The person admitted that she had used the credit card, but of course it was only for company expenses. And those days that attorneys love when they're sitting there with their attorney and you say, well, what did you buy at Office Depot? And I said, just stuff for the business, just stuff for the business. And how many children do you have? 4. Oh, well, let's look at September 2nd, whatever the year was. You bought 4 Texas Instrument computers, 4 dictionaries. I mean, it's obvious that it was used for personal use. They have to monitor not just who has the credit cards, but what are the credit cards being used for. So we call it segregation of duties, because without segregation of duties, we have false or voided checks that are in the mix, but nobody's catching them. Nobody's seeing it. The misuse of credit cards, personal utilities. Here's the invoice from National Fuel Gas, and boss signs off on it. That twice that month, who's going to remember? They signed off on utilities, and it happens to be the organization's bill as well as the personal bill of whoever the target is in this case. payroll or insurance fraud, again, payments that are being made that have nothing to do with the organization or the corporation. A cashectomy, taking the cash. I'm surprised myself at how much cash is in the system, that people still pay bills, they still make contributions, especially at fundraisers. Cash, these meat raffles. I mean, I've learned more about meat raffles than I've ever wanted to know, but so much cash comes in. And if only one person is in charge of that cash going into the deposit or even handling it at all, we are seeing huge amounts of fraud taking place. I've had people say, oh, I've had the deposit on the front seat of my car. I've left it there for 3 months. You have to have a check. You can't just, there has to be a segregation of duties. Line of credit abuse. I have seen cases where people know there's a line of credit for the organization or the business, but because they're not using it, they are shocked when the bank calls and says you've used up your entire line of credit. If you don't need it, don't use it, but make sure you check what the balances are if there is a line of credit. So I keep saying I've heard, when people come into our office as victims of a crime, something goes on, not just the money. It isn't just the money. Psychologically, it is overwhelming to think that somebody took you, that you believed in them, and this has happened. But as we go over the facts and we start telling, how did it happen? People say, well, I was afraid to ask the simple question. I didn't understand it, so I never asked it. I thought somebody would think it was stupid that I didn't ask it. By the way, I'm looking at the picture that I have here. Does anybody know what the thinker is thinking? He's thinking, where did I leave my clothes? The superb storyteller is the person who makes up these wild stories about why money's missing, or this check was written, or there's an invoice for something. Yes, they tend to be superb storytellers. If you're getting excuse after excuse, why wasn't this deposit made on a certain date? Why is this vendor telling me the bill hasn't been paid? We have organizations that their taxes weren't paid, and there's an excuse. Oh, that was just a mistake. I've called them. I've answered all the issues. It's been corrected. Don't worry about it. You can't just take the simple answers or the excuses time and time again. People who keep putting off their meetings, and it may be to talk about finances of an organization. Oh, I can't make it. Certainly with COVID, we've seen far more embezzlements, and it was easy to put off meeting. Books balanced. As I've indicated to you, your account can balance. That's not an issue if you're writing checks to individuals that are different than what the register says. So I know that people generally don't think in terms of having an audit done, but it is important. And I've also found, these stories get told why we can't meet with the auditor. Oh, but I have to do something with the children, or I'm sick or something, but an audit should be done. We go and have officers, year by year, different officers come in, and in nonprofits, I've seen it quite often, but the same treasurer remains. And nobody checks. I mean, I'll admit, I've been part of it. You're on a committee and the treasurer is going to give the report, and all those in favor, yay, okay. Nobody's really checked it. Everybody believes what is in that report that the treasurer has given. And it may go from president to president to president. And nobody has really checked that this report that the treasurer is giving month after month, year after year, is that really what's in the bank and is it accurate? So don't be afraid to dig deeper. Nobody, if they're doing the right thing, no one's offended by it. And we have had examples where the person who is chairman of the treasury for a soccer team is also doing the other little girls swimming team and the boosters from, something else. An audit or segregation of duties caused without having an audit or without segregation of duties, and somebody making that deep dive into the records is always interested, always necessary. And I trusted him or her. I don't know how many times I've heard it. We treated her like she was our own daughter. Trust is a wonderful thing. I mean, we all trust people. For those of you who are aware of what's happened in the DA's office years and years ago, we had an embezzlement in our own office. And it was the first time I really understood that horribleness of saying we trusted him so much and what it does to you. So we've got to keep on top of it. And as ugly as it is to say, hey, I'm here to see if you're honest, you have to do it to protect funds. So fraud is constantly evolving. Our methods, the methods of the fraud are becoming more and more damning. Segregation of duties becomes all the more demanding, a second set of eyes on the oversight, and asking the simple questions and demanding answers. When I came into the district attorney's office, we didn't have fax machines, and now you scan everything. So the methods which people can forge checks or change the business records, or even as I said, the wire fraud, the misspellings and such, having wire transfer changes, they're evolving, and our ability to deal with these crimes is more and more becoming an issue of what is the percentage of solvability. So that's why I want to be here. So we don't have to worry about the solvability, but that rather, I'm not going to see you in here saying, why me? So can all fraud be avoided? Not at all. But don't be embarrassed to vet personnel handling money or credit. I have had people call and say, we're out hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the person that we hired, I just saw was prosecuted in your office 10 years ago. Why didn't somebody look that up originally? Watch your computer carefully. Record keeping is required for all sorts of reasons, but look behind the records for receipts, deposits, and voided checks. And my final word of advice is think about insurance for a dishonesty policy. There have been many cases that if it were not for the insurance, individual corporations or non-for-profits or even individuals would never have gotten their money back were it not for the fact that they did have a dishonesty policy, so that the coffers could be refilled while we try to find the bad guy and prosecute the bad guy. Because chances are, bad guy didn't invest the money, okay? It was spent. The chances of getting money back are not really good. They wouldn't have taken it in the first place. So think about that insurance dishonesty policy. And please make sure that you look behind the records. But don't be afraid to call us. Even if you have questions about what should I be doing, just call the district attorney's office or your local police agency and ask, what can I do at this point? Can you help me? So I have nothing more other than if you have some questions.
I'm looking at the Q&A and the webinar, and right now we have nothing. The only thing we had was that you had already addressed. So If there's no additional questions, Candace, thank you so much. You've certainly given us a lot to think about. A lot of things that we can tighten some controls and make sure we have proper segregation of duties. And to our attendees, please complete your surveys. We do value your feedback. Candace, thank you so much. And we appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Happy holidays all.
Thank you, you too.